I should have worn gloves. That was my first thought as I looked down at my hands, resting against the pristine white tablecloth. The linen was Italian, imported, the kind of fabric that probably cost more per yard than my entire work wardrobe combined. And there were my hands, freshly scrubbed in the hotel bathroom less than 20 minutes ago, skin raw from soap and water, yet still marked. Faint shadows of grease clung beneath my nails. A new, uneven scratch crossed my thumb, courtesy of a solar panel bracket that hadn't wanted to cooperate. They were hands shaped by work, builders' hands. And here, in this Georgetown dining room filled with Washington, D.C.'s political upper crust, they looked like a provocation. The air smelled of roasted duck and inherited wealth. Crystal glasses chimed softly, the sound thin and fragile, scraping against my nerves. At the head of the table stood my father, David, completely at ease. He held his champagne flute like a royal scepter, his cheeks flushed with the smug confidence that comes from standing close to power for decades without ever truly holding it. He tapped a silver spoon against his glass. Silence fell. 30 faces turned toward him, senators, aides, lobbyists, fixers, influence brokers, and me. To my son, Tyler, my father announced, his voice swelling as if he were addressing the Senate floor itself, a man who understands the burden of legacy. A man who knows that power is not just what you do, but who you stand beside. He smiled broadly at my older brother, who sat perfectly composed in his tailored suit, absorbing the admiration the way a lizard absorbs sunlight. Tyler has secured a position that will help shape policy for the next generation. He is the future of this family. Applause spread through the room, measured, elegant, costly applause. I joined in, clapping slowly, mechanically. Then my father's eyes shifted. They didn't soften when they reached me. They snagged like silk tearing on a rough edge. His smile remained intact, but his gaze cooled. And of course, he continued, lowering his voice with theatrical gravity, we should also acknowledge my daughter Alexandra. A pause. We apologize for her appearance this evening. He gestured in my direction as if indicating a spill. Alexandra works in construction, manual labor. She prefers playing in the dirt while the adults handle the affairs of the world. But we love her anyway, don't we? Laughter rippled around the table, not loud, but sharp, polished, precise. The woman seated beside me, a lobbyist adorned with pearls the size of marbles, edged her chair slightly away as if scarcity were contagious. My mother, Natalie, let out a brittle, tinkling laugh and lifted her napkin to her lips, masking the tension in her face. Tyler smirked, raising his glass toward me in mock tribute. To playing in the dirt, ally, he mouthed. I didn't flinch, I didn't drop my gaze, I didn't pull my hands from the table to hide them. I stayed exactly where I was, letting the heat of humiliation wash over me and then pass. What remained wasn't pain, it was clarity. For years, I'd wondered what it would take to finally cut the cord. To stop waiting for recognition that never came. And in that moment, as my father apologized for my existence to a room full of strangers, I understood the cost of belonging to this family. The price was my dignity, and I was finished paying it. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't storm out, I didn't throw my wine in his face, I didn't even let my expression change. I lifted my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and placed it neatly back in my lap. Around me, laughter faded into murmurs. Side conversations resumed. Silverware scraped softly against china. My father had already turned away, dismissing me the way one dismisses a server who brought the wrong entree. He leaned toward a senator's aide, his hand resting casually on the shoulder of his tailored jacket, a jacket I had paid for. The realization didn't arrive with anger. It came with the cool precision of an accountant spotting a discrepancy. I studied the room, really studied it, the baccarat crystal chandelier, orchids flown in from Hawaii that morning. A vintage Bordeaux breathing patiently in its decanter. It was flawless, a portrait of DC power and refinement, and it was all an illusion. A projection financed by a single, quiet stream of money flowing from a bank account in Austin, Texas, into the hollow shell of the Sterling Foundation. I slid my hand into my purse and rested my fingers against my phone. The metal felt cool. Hidden beneath the weight of the tablecloth, shielded by layers of linen, I unlocked the screen. The soft blue glow washed across my palm, unseen by anyone else. I opened my banking app. Face ID recognized me instantly, granting access to the reality my family refused to acknowledge. I scrolled past corporate accounts, past infrastructure holdings, past liquidity reserves earmarked for the Nevada solar grid expansion. Then I found it. A recurring wire transfer, scheduled for the first of every month. Anonymous grant, Sterling Foundation Operating Fund $50,000 every month. $600,000 a year, enough to keep this brownstone lit, to cover the mortgage my father pretended didn't exist, to bankroll Tyler's consulting trips across Europe. I'd set it up 3 years earlier, burying it beneath layers of shell companies so they'd never know their lifeline was spun by the daughter they were embarrassed by. I told myself it was charity. I told myself it was responsibility. Now I saw it for what it was, a subscription fee for a service I wasn't receiving. I tapped the transaction. Options appeared: edit, skip, cancel. My thumb hovered. I glanced up at my mother. She was poking at her salad, her expression a familiar blend of pity and irritation. "Don't sulk," she mouthed, flashing a conspiratorial wink at her neighbor. "It's a party." I looked back down and pressed cancel. A confirmation prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? This action cannot be undone." I selected yes. The screen refreshed. Transfer canceled. That was it. No drama, no thunder. Just a silent digital amputation. The notification disappeared, and with it, the foundation beneath their entire lifestyle. I locked my phone and returned it to my purse. I lifted my wine glass, the delicate stem resting between calloused fingers, and took a slow sip. The wine was exceptional, rich, layered, expensive. I let it linger. It was the last thing they would ever receive from me. I wasn't always this cold. 5 years ago, I was just Alexandra, the construction mistake who walked away from Georgetown Law after realizing I didn't want to argue about the world. I wanted to build it. I remember the day I left. My father stood in the foyer of the brownstone, the same space he'd welcomed tonight's guests, and told me that walking out meant abandoning my legacy. "You're trading influence for irrelevance," he sneered. "Enjoy playing in the dirt." So I did. I moved to Austin, Texas with $3,000 and a terrifying amount of determination. I swapped power suits for steel-toed boots, political galas for 110-degree days on open construction sites. I founded EcoGrid with nothing but a laptop and the conviction that America's energy infrastructure was broken and fixable. The first 2 years were brutal. I lived in a trailer on my initial site because rent was out of reach. I studied blueprints by flashlight. I negotiated contracts with men who assumed I was an assistant. I ate dust figuratively and literally. While my family traded favors over cocktails in D.C., I was laying the groundwork for a new power system. It turns out playing in the dirt is lucrative when you know what you're constructing. EcoGrid exploded. We weren't just installing solar arrays, we were redesigning how cities consumed energy. By year 3, we had contracts with 3 major municipalities. By year 4, we were Texas's primary infrastructure partner. Last month, our Series C valuation hit $410 million. I wasn't just a builder anymore. I was a force, but my family didn't know. To them, I was still the failure, and in some twisted way, I wanted it that way. I wanted their affection to be genuine, not transactional. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I was worth. So when I learned, through whispers, that the Sterling Foundation was on the brink of collapse due to my father's mismanagement, I stepped in. I didn't let them fall. I didn't let them lose the brownstone or the prestige they prized above their children. I became their anonymous benefactor. I told myself it was grace. I told myself it was maturity. In truth, it was something smaller. I was paying dues to a family that didn't want me, funding the hope that one day they might notice the hand keeping the lights on. Tonight, as my father mocked the hands that signed his checks, the illusion shattered. I wasn't their savior. I was their mark. And the most painful truth wasn't that they exploited me. It was that I allowed it. You might wonder why I stayed, why I paid. Why a woman capable of negotiating multi-million-dollar infrastructure contracts with the state of Texas couldn't say no to her own father over a monthly wire transfer. It's a fair question. The answer isn't love, it isn't duty, it's conditioning. Psychologists call it the invisible chain of the survivor. It's that phantom tether that keeps you circling the people who hurt you, waiting for the one moment of validation that will make the years of dismissal make sense. I wasn't just funding the Sterling Foundation. I was paying a retainer fee for the hope that one day my father would look at me with the same pride he reserved for Tyler. I treated their approval like a project I could engineer. If I just provided enough capital, if I just stabilized their chaotic finances, if I just polished the bars of the cage bright enough, they would finally invite me inside. I was the architect of my own prison. I convinced myself that my anonymity was a power move, a way to test their love. Would they love me without the money? But deep down, I knew the answer. I was hiding my success because I was terrified that if they knew I didn't need them, they would have no use for me at all. For 3 years, I lived a double life. In Austin, I was Sterling, the woman who turned sunlight into electricity. I wore hard hats and commanded job sites. I was decisive, respected, and formidable. But the moment I crossed the state line into D.C., I shrank. I put on the role of the disappointment like an old, ill-fitting coat. I let them interrupt me. I let them critique my clothes. I let them sneer at my little construction job. I did it because the chain was wrapped so tight around my throat, I didn't even feel it anymore. It was just the way I breathed. But tonight, when my father apologized to his guests for my presence, something snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet metallic click of a lock disengaging. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I didn't see a patriarch or a titan of industry. I saw a man in a suit I bought, drinking wine I paid for, leveraging a reputation I was subsidizing. He wasn't the giant, I was. The cognitive dissonance cleared. I realized I hadn't been paying for their survival. I had been paying for my own abuse. I had handed them the whip every single month and thanked them for the privilege. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lees and old money. The air tasted different now. It tasted like oxygen. I wasn't waiting for permission to leave anymore. I was just waiting for the check to clear, or in this case, for the cancellation to hit. The chain was on the floor, and I was the only one at the table who knew I was free. The dinner continued oblivious to the financial earthquake I had just triggered. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone politics galas, who was summering where Tyler was holding court telling a story about a disaster of a meeting he'd had with a senator who didn't understand the nuance of leverage. It's like talking to a brick wall. Tyler laughed, swirling his cognac. Some people just don't have the capacity for high-level strategy. My mother, Natalie, leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light. Well, darling, that's why you're indispensable. Not everyone has your gift for navigating complexity. She glanced at me then, her expression tightening. Unlike some of us who prefer simpler tasks, Alexandra, dear, I hope you remembered to wash your hands properly. I swear I can still see grease on your thumb, the table chuckled. It was a reflex, a social habit. I looked at my thumb. The scratch was still there, a thin red line. It's not grease, mother, I said. My voice level, it's a cut from a bracket. A bracket. Tyler snorted. Listen to her. She sounds like she's building a erector set. Actually, I said, I'm building the power grid for the entire western seaboard. They stared at me for a second, just a second. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, but then the cognitive dissonance kicked in. I watched it happen in real time. My father blinked, his brain rejecting the data that contradicted his worldview. My mother's smile faltered, then reset like a glitching screen. Oh, Alexandra, she sighed, shaking her head. Always so dramatic. I'm sure your little solar project is very sweet, sweet, I repeated. $410 million isn't sweet, mother, it's a valuation, my father laughed. It was a loud, booming sound meant to drown out the absurdity of my statement. 400 million. Did you hear that, everyone? My daughter has an active imagination. Perhaps she should write fiction instead of playing with construction equipment. They couldn't see it. They physically couldn't see it. Psychologists call it the scapegoat mechanism. The family needs a failure to define their own success. If I wasn't the failure, then Tyler wasn't the golden child and my father wasn't the patriarch. If I was the titan, then they were just expensive pets. Their egos protected them from reality like a blast shield. I'm not imagining anything, I said, leaning back in my chair. But since we're talking about finances, Tyler, how is the consulting firm doing? Still waiting on that big contract, Tyler stiffened. These things take time, Ali, you wouldn't understand. High negotiations aren't like digging ditches. No, I agreed. Digging ditches actually produces something. The air in the room changed. The guests shifted, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. My father's smile vanished. That's enough, Alexandra. You are a guest at this table. Act like one. A guest, I am mused. That's an interesting word for the person paying the mortgage. My mother dropped her fork. It clattered against the china. A sharp, violent sound in the hushed room, I said. I looked directly at my father. Enjoy the wine, Dad. It's the last bottle I'm buying. They stared at me, confusion, wearing with outrage. They still didn't get it. They thought I was being rude. They didn't realize I was being literal. The blindness of the elite is a fascinating thing. They are so accustomed to the light staying on, they never think to look for the generator. But the generator just quit, and it was about to get very dark in here. The tension in the room was brittle, ready to snap when the double doors at the far end of the dining room swung open. The sound was heavy, final, breaking the suffocating silence. Heads turned. Jessica stood in the doorway. Jessica, Tyler's fiancée, looked nothing like the composed DC socialite she usually portrayed. Her hair was slightly askew, her cheeks flushed, and she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. She was still wearing her coat, breathless as if she had run all the way from K Street. Jessica. Tyler stood up, his face transforming from annoyance to relief. Finally, we were starting to worry. The toast is over. But quiet, Tyler, Jessica said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a siren. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at my parents. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and awe. She walked slowly toward the table, ignoring the confused murmurs of the guests. She stopped directly across from me, her hands gripping the back of an empty chair. "I just got off the phone with the board," she said, her voice trembling. "The Texas grid deal is stalled indefinitely." My father scoffed, annoyed at the interruption of his dinner party. "Jessica, darling, we are in the middle of a celebration. Business can wait." "No, David, it can't," Jessica snapped, her gaze never leaving mine. "Because the person holding up the deal, the person who owns the proprietary technology we need to move forward, the person who just flagged our environmental compliance report, is sitting at this table." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the pantry. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her voice shrill. "Alexandra works in construction." "Construction?" Jessica let out a short, hysterical laugh. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Do you know who this is? This isn't just your daughter. This is Sterling." My father frowned. "Who? R. Sterling?" Jessica repeated, emphasizing each syllable. "The founder of EcoGrid, the woman who built the Nevada solar array. The woman who personally negotiated the infrastructure contract for the entire state of Texas last year. She's not a construction worker, David. She's the titan who is currently deciding whether my firm survives the quarter." The cognitive dissonance in the room shattered. I watched it happen. My father's face went slack. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Tyler looked between Jessica and me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "That's impossible," Tyler stammered. "Ali dropped out. She lives in a trailer." "I lived in a trailer for 6 months," I said, my voice calm, filling the silence. "4 years ago, while I was building the first grid. Now I live in the penthouse of the building I own in downtown Austin." I looked at Jessica. I saw the compliance report. "Jess, your firm missed the groundwater impact study. Fix it and I'll sign off on Monday," but not a moment before. "Yes," Jessica breathed, nodding rapidly. "Yes, Miss Sterling, thank you. I'll handle it immediately." "Miss Sterling," my father whispered. The name tasted foreign in his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see his daughter. He saw power and he was terrified. The shift was violent. The air in the room didn't just change, it inverted. 5 minutes ago, I was the embarrassment. Now I was the most dangerous person in the room. The guests were staring at me with naked hunger. The